1191 Glastonbury Abbey, England. Monks were digging in the ancient cemetery when they found something impossible. A lead cross, buried deep in the ground, and on it, an inscription in Latin. Here lies buried the renowned King Arthur in the Isle of Avalon. They kept digging. 16 feet down, they found a massive oak coffin. Inside were 2 skeletons. A tall man, over 7 feet they claimed, and a woman with golden hair still clinging to her skull. The monks announced their discovery to the world. King Arthur and Queen Guinevere, found at last. Proof that the legend was real. The crowds came. Pilgrims, nobles, kings. Everyone wanted to see the grave of Britain's greatest hero. But there was a problem. The lead cross disappeared shortly after. The bones were reburied and lost during the Reformation. And modern archaeologists are almost certain the whole thing was a hoax. A publicity stunt by monks who needed money to rebuild their fire-damaged abbey. But here's the thing that keeps historians awake at night. What if some part of it was true? Not the 7-foot skeleton. Not the convenient inscription. But the core idea. What if there really was an Arthur? A warrior. A leader. A man who fought so fiercely that his legend survived 1,500 years. And if he existed, why did he disappear from history? Why is the greatest British hero someone we can't prove was real? Let's go back to the one period in British history we know almost nothing about. The 5th and 6th centuries AD. The Romans had left Britain. After 400 years of occupation, they just left, pulled their legions back to defend Rome itself. And Britain collapsed. Without Roman administration, the cities fell apart. Without Roman military, the borders were defenseless. Within decades, Britain went from an organized province to a fractured wasteland. Warlords fought over scraps of territory. Saxon raiders invaded from across the North Sea. And the Romano-British population, the people who had lived under Roman rule, were being pushed west. Into Wales. Into Cornwall. Anywhere they could survive. This period used to be called the Dark Ages. Not because it was barbaric, but because we have almost no written records. The Romans kept detailed histories. The Anglo-Saxons who came later did too. But the people in between, the Romano-British, almost nothing. A few mentions in continental chronicles. A handful of Welsh poems. Fragments. And somewhere in those fragments is Arthur. Maybe. The earliest mention of Arthur isn't until 300 years after he supposedly lived. A Welsh monk named Nennius wrote Historia Brittonum around 830 AD. He described a war leader named Arthur who fought 12 battles against the Saxons. Not a king. A dux bellorum. A leader of battles. And he won all 12. The most important was at a place called Mount Badon. Arthur supposedly killed 960 men single-handedly in one charge. Obviously exaggerated. But the Battle of Badon was real. Other sources mention it. A major British victory that halted Saxon expansion for decades. So maybe there was a leader at Badon. Maybe his name was Arthur. Or maybe Arthur was a title. A composite of several leaders. Or maybe he never existed at all. We don't know. For centuries, Arthur remained obscure. A footnote in Welsh poetry. A name in genealogies of questionable accuracy. But then something happened. In 1136, a Welsh cleric named Geoffrey of Monmouth published Historia Regum Britanniae, the history of the kings of Britain. And in it, Arthur wasn't a minor war leader. He was the greatest king who ever lived. Geoffrey's Arthur was born through magic. Merlin the wizard helped Uther Pendragon disguise himself to seduce another man's wife. Arthur pulled a sword from a stone to prove his right to rule. He established Camelot. Founded the Knights of the Round Table. He conquered not just Britain but Ireland, Iceland, Norway, and Gaul. He fought the Roman Empire itself. And he had Excalibur, a magical sword given to him by the Lady of the Lake. A weapon that made him invincible. Geoffrey's Arthur was superhuman. Mythological. But here's the thing. Geoffrey claimed he was translating from a certain very ancient book written in the British language. A book no one else had ever seen. A book that conveniently disappeared. Most historians think Geoffrey made it up, that he took fragments of Welsh legends and expanded them into an epic, created a glorious British past to rival the classical histories of Greece and Rome. But whether Arthur was real or not didn't matter anymore. Geoffrey's book was a sensation. It was copied hundreds of times, translated into multiple languages. Within decades, Arthur was famous across Europe. French poets added Lancelot and the love triangle with Guinevere. German writers added the Holy Grail quest. English authors added Galahad and the tragic fall of Camelot. Every generation added something new, until Arthur became the legend we know today. Let's talk about Excalibur, because there are actually two versions of Arthur's sword, and most people don't know that. In early versions, Arthur pulls a sword from a stone to prove he's the rightful king. That's the sword in the stone. But later, that sword breaks in battle, and Arthur receives a new sword from the Lady of the Lake. That's Excalibur. The name comes from Welsh, Caeldfulch, which might come from Latin, Caliburnus, or it might mean hard lightning, or cut steel. No one's certain, but what matters is what the sword represents. Divine right, chosen destiny, power that can't be earned, only given. Arthur didn't seize the throne through conquest. He was selected, by magic, by fate. And at the end of his life, when he's dying from wounds, what does he do? He orders his knight Bedivere to throw Excalibur back into the lake. Bedivere hesitates. It's the greatest sword in the world. But Arthur insists, so Bedivere throws it, and a hand rises from the water, catches it, pulls it under. The sword returns to where it came from, because Arthur's power was never really his. It was borrowed, temporary, and when his time ended, it had to go back. That's a deeply melancholic idea, that even the greatest king is just a steward, that power is cyclical, given and taken away, that nothing lasts. It's the opposite of most hero myths. Most heroes die at their peak. Achilles, Hector, they're immortalized in glory. But Arthur lives to see his kingdom fall apart, to see his best knight betray him with his wife, to see his illegitimate son Mordred rebel and destroy everything. Arthur's story isn't about triumph. It's about inevitable decline. The Round Table is Arthur's most famous innovation, but it didn't appear until the 12th century. A French poet named Was added it. The idea was simple: a circular table with no head, every knight equal, no one above another. It was revolutionary, because medieval society was obsessed with hierarchy. Kings sat above nobles, nobles above knights, knights above commoners. Everything was ranked. But at Arthur's table, the greatest knights in the world sat as equals. Except it didn't work, because people aren't equal. Even among the greatest knights, some were better than others. Lancelot was the best fighter. Gawain was the most loyal. Galahad was the most pure. And they competed, constantly, for honor, for reputation, for the king's favor. The Round Table was supposed to prevent conflict, but it just changed the nature of it. Instead of fighting over position, they fought over deeds. Who could complete the greatest quest? Slay the worst monster, find the Holy Grail. And that competition destroyed them, because in trying to prove their worth, they tore the kingdom apart. Lancelot and Guinevere's affair, Mordred's rebellion, the final battle at Camlan where Arthur and his son kill each other. All of it traces back to pride, to the need to be the best. The Round Table didn't eliminate hierarchy. It just made the hierarchy deadlier. Because when everyone's supposed to be equal, proving you're better becomes everything. The Holy Grail wasn't part of Arthur's story originally. It was added by French poets in the 12th century. They combined Christian mysticism with Arthurian legend, and created the most powerful symbol in medieval literature. The Grail was the cup Christ used at the Last Supper. Joseph of Arimathea supposedly brought it to Britain. It had miraculous powers, could heal wounds, provide endless food, but it disappeared, hidden somewhere in Britain, and only the purest knight could find it. Arthur's knights spent years searching. Most failed. Some died. They faced temptations, tests, moral challenges. Because the Grail quest wasn't really about finding a cup. It was about proving your soul was worthy. 3 knights got close. Percival, Bors, Galahad. But only Galahad succeeded. Because only Galahad had never sinned. He was a virgin, had never lied, never acted in pride. He was perfect, and perfection was required. But here's the dark truth of the Grail story. When Galahad found it, he died. The vision of the Grail was so overwhelming that his mortal body couldn't survive it. He achieved his goal and immediately ceased to exist. And the Grail disappeared again, taken up to heaven. So the quest that consumed Arthur's knights for years resulted in nothing. The greatest knight died. The Grail vanished. And Camelot was weakened because so many knights had left to search for it. The Grail quest is a metaphor for the pursuit of perfection, of absolute purity. And the message is clear. It will destroy you, because perfection isn't human. Galahad wasn't human. Not really. He was an ideal, a symbol. And ideals can't survive in the real world. Only flawed people can. Arthur's kingdom didn't fall because of external enemies. It fell because of internal betrayal. His best knight, Lancelot, loved his wife, Guinevere. And she loved him back. They tried to hide it. But everyone knew. Arthur knew too. But he didn't want to acknowledge it. Because acknowledging it meant tearing his kingdom apart. Lancelot was his greatest knight, the hero of Camelot. Guinevere was his queen, the symbol of his legitimacy. Exposing their affair would destroy both. So Arthur stayed silent, and let the poison spread. But his nephew Mordred, born from Arthur's unknowing incest with his half-sister, wouldn't let it rest. Mordred was bitter, illegitimate, overlooked. He wanted the throne, so he forced Arthur's hand. He publicly accused Guinevere of adultery, demanded she be burned at the stake. Arthur had no choice. The law was clear. Guinevere was condemned. But as she was being led to execution, Lancelot arrived. He slaughtered the guards, rescued her, and fled to France. Arthur couldn't ignore that, so he took his army across the Channel to fight Lancelot. The 2 greatest warriors in Britain, fighting each other, while the kingdom burned. Mordred stayed behind, and he saw his opportunity. He spread rumors that Arthur was dead, claimed the throne, even tried to marry Guinevere to legitimize his rule. When Arthur heard, he rushed back to Britain, and the 2 armies met at Camlan. The battle was apocalyptic. Thousands died. Knights who had fought together for years killed each other. The Round Table destroyed itself. In the end, only Arthur and Mordred remained standing. Arthur ran Mordred through with a spear, and with his dying breath, Mordred swung his sword, caught Arthur in the head. A mortal wound, father and son, killing each other. Arthur didn't die on the battlefield. According to legend, he was carried to Avalon, the Isle of Apples, a mystical place, where he would be healed and sleep until Britain needed him again. The once and future king, not dead, just waiting. And for centuries people believed it. During times of crisis, rumors would spread. Arthur has returned. Arthur will save us. It was hope, desperate hope, that the Golden Age could come back. But it never did, because Arthur's Golden Age never existed. Even in the legends, Camelot was brief. A few years of glory, then betrayal, then collapse. The Round Table lasted less than a generation. The Grail quest destroyed more than it saved. And Arthur's reign ended with his kingdom in ruins. So what was Avalon really? A metaphor for the stories we tell ourselves about the past. That things used to be better, purer, more noble. That somewhere, somehow, we can return to that. But we can't, because it was never real in the first place. For centuries, people have searched for Arthur, for Camelot, for Excalibur, for his tomb, and they've found nothing. Dozens of sites claim to be Camelot. Tintagel in Cornwall, Cadbury Castle in Somerset, Winchester, Carlisle. All of them have some archaeological evidence of 5th or 6th century occupation. But none of them match the legendary description. Because the legendary Camelot was a medieval castle with towers and tournaments. And in the 5th century, Britain didn't have castles. They had hill forts, wooden structures, Roman ruins. Some historians think Arthur might have been a Romano-British commander named Ambrosius Aurelianus. He fought the Saxons, won significant victories, but there's no evidence he was called Arthur. Others think Arthur was Riothamus, a British king who fought in Gaul. Or maybe he was a composite, multiple warriors combined into one legend. Or maybe he never existed at all. In 1998, a stone was found at Tintagel with a 6th century inscription. It mentioned someone named Artegnu, close to Arthur. Historians got excited. Then they realized it was probably a common name. And the inscription wasn't even about a king, just someone who lived there, another dead end. The truth is, we'll probably never know. If Arthur existed, he lived in Britain's darkest age, a time when history wasn't being written. And by the time people started writing about him, he'd already become legend. The real man, if he existed, is buried under centuries of storytelling. And maybe that's appropriate, because Arthur isn't really about history. He's about meaning. Every generation reinvents Arthur. Medieval knights made him a crusader. Victorian England made him a gentleman. Modern films make him a revolutionary. We shape Arthur to reflect what we wish we were. But the core of the story never changes. A king who tried to create something better. A leader who gathered the best around him. Who tried to make power serve justice instead of the other way around. And who failed. Not because he was weak, but because people are flawed. Because even the purest intentions get corrupted. Because betrayal comes from within, not without. That's why Arthur's story endures. Not because it's hopeful, but because it's honest. It admits that every golden age ends. Every great leader falls. Every noble dream eventually fails. But it also says you should try anyway. Arthur knew his kingdom would fall. Merlin warned him. Prophecies foretold it. But he built Camelot anyway. He gathered the knights anyway. He tried to create a world where might served right. And for a brief, shining moment he succeeded. Before it all came crashing down. That's the tragedy. And the beauty. Arthur failed. But he tried. And the trying is what made him legendary. So was there a King Arthur? Probably not. Not the way the legends describe. No magical sword. No wizard advisor. No round table. But was there a leader named something like Arthur who fought the Saxons and inspired stories? Maybe. We'll never know for certain. But here's what I believe. Arthur is real. Not as a historical figure. As an idea. The idea that leadership means service. That power should be tempered by justice. That even in darkness you fight for something better. That you gather good people around you and try to build something worth protecting. And that when it falls apart, because it will fall apart, you face the end with dignity. Arthur throwing Excalibur back into the lake. That image haunts me, because it's about letting go. Admitting that your time is over. That the power you held wasn't really yours. And accepting that gracefully. How many leaders can do that? How many cling to power even as everything crumbles? Arthur didn't. In the end, he gave it back. And sailed to Avalon. The once and future king. People still say it. Still believe that somewhere Arthur sleeps. Waiting for Britain's darkest hour. When he'll return and save the kingdom. It's a beautiful myth. But also a dangerous one. Because it suggests we're helpless without him. That we need a savior. A king. Someone to fix everything. But that's not the real lesson of Arthur. The real lesson is that there is no savior. Arthur failed. The round table fell. Camelot burned. But the idea survived. We don't need Arthur to return. We need to be Arthur. To take up the sword. Gather our companions. Build something worth fighting for. Knowing it will probably fail. Doing it anyway. That's the once and future king. Not a person. A choice. That every generation has to make. King Arthur. Who may never have existed. But whose story has shaped Western civilization for 1,000 years. Who failed spectacularly. And became immortal because of it. Who sleeps in Avalon. Or in our collective imagination. Waiting. Not to return. But to remind us. that the fight for something better never ends. Even when we know we'll lose, especially then,